Architecture and Exhibitions Committee and Director of Architecture and Urbanism. I'd like to thank the School of Architecture and Planning and the department head for the sponsorship of this talk, as well as the MIT Architecture Committee and Joelle Carella in communications, all for their work to facilitate this talk and the entire series. I'll first read the land acknowledgement. MIT acknowledges Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land on which we sit is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. On behalf of the committee and the Department of Architecture, thank you all for joining us tonight in person and online for the lecture by Joe Nagasaka of Schemata Architects. Schemata Architects was founded in 1998 by Joe Nagasaka upon graduating from Tokyo University of the Arts. The office is located in Kitasando in the Sendagaya neighborhood of Tokyo. That's near Meiji Shrine in Harajuku, for those of you who have visited. Since 1998, Schemata Architects has established a global practice that is also hyper-local. The scale of the work of Schemata Architects ranges widely from furniture to architecture to urban landscapes. The projects include interiors, commercial and hospitality architecture in works that are embedded in daily rituals and life in Japan, such as cafes, shops, and a public bath. The most notable projects include the Sayama Flat, the house in Okusawa, Flat Table, and the project Color Ring, of which you'll see glimpses today. Joe might not get through everything in the lecture, but can also show slides during the Q&A. Across the varied scales and types of architecture, Joe Nagasaka seeks to deliver new perspectives and values from everyday things and existing environments by focusing on the one-to-one and human scale, through material sourcing and selection, and through design. This sensitivity to what exists is complemented by a practice of creating original architectural experiences by identifying and exploring unique concepts like subtraction, misuse, knowledge renewal, invisible development, and half architecture. We are honored to hear directly about Joe Nagasaka's approach today. Please join me in welcoming him to talk to us. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing me. Hello, I'm Joe Nagasaka from Tokyo. I arrived on 12 to New York and went to LA and back New York yesterday morning. Then now I'm here. So I have still jet lag. So please forgive me the not sharp. Yes. Today I want to talk about half architecture. We believe that the architecture should adapt to its environment and achieve of the community, activities of a community. By doing this, each place can regain its original spirit. It's not about forcing new idea onto a place. Instead, it's about drawing power from what already exists and creating new value from it. This is the concept we call half architecture. My journey as an architect also started by adapting to the environment. Whatever I was doing, I always considered myself an architect. After studying architecture for 4 years at university, I started my own practice by accident without planning. Since then, I've continued my work as the head of Schema Architects for 27 years. At the beginning, I wasn't doing building design right away. Instead, I started with what I could do by myself. I designed the furniture and even made it by myself. Furniture design was a different world from architecture, but just as the OMA was revolutionizing architecture, drug design was changing the world of furniture. Unlike the architecture industry, that design world was open to the newcomers. Even someone unknown like me was welcome. This gave me the chance to explore unseen knowledge and develop my ideas. One of my first major furniture works was flat table. The first time I used epoxy resin was in Sayama Flat, where I applied it to the floor. Later, at the Nadif bookstore, I experimented with mixing color into epoxy. What happened was unexpected. When I mixed the resin, deeper area became darker, while shallow area turned transparent. And suddenly, cat footprints appeared in the material. This was because I had taken an old wooden table with an even surface from Sayama Flat and poured pink epoxy over it. The idea actually came from the technique I had developed earlier for the Nadif project. I simply applied it to the table. By pouring colored epoxy into an uneven surface, I found that it smoothed out the surface while keeping a unique texture. That's how the flat table concept was born. The idea spread quickly, and in 2011, I exhibited it for the first time in Milan. The following year, I introduced Uzukuri with Establish and Sons. Through this experience, I became fascinated with Milan design scene, which was open to young designers. Since then, I've continued to exhibit my work in Milan. Every year, constantly engaging in a renewal of knowledge. One of my inspirations came from tsugaru nuri, a traditional Japanese lacquer technique. Before the lacquer dries, small seeds are sprinkled on the surface to create texture. Then layers of black and red lacquer are applied. And after drying, the surface is sanded to reveal the pattern. I adapted this technique using uzukuri, another traditional method, to create a technique I call coloring. Instead of lacquer, I used the 3 layers of paint and then sanded the surface to reveal the color underneath. This completed the idea. A few years later, Artec asked me to apply the coloring technique to Stool 60. This kind of conceptual furniture design doesn't have many strict rules, so it's easy to turn idea directly into form. That's why it's very good as a way to train the mind. but coming up with a new idea every year is still not easy. Also, I naturally have a strong preference for certain materials. If you look at the shelves in my office, you'll probably understand the kind of things I like. This is one of them. At the top left, there's a lamp from construction site in Italy. On the right, there's a nameplate with our office address. There's also a lot of ocean trash. The blue one is a fan from the ventilation system. That's even there's even a sun faded soda can with half of the print gone. Some are art piece, some are craft, and some are our own sample, but it's hard to tell which is which. I like these strange and funny objects. After being polished in the sea or burned by the sun, even strong color plastics start to look nice. And this is a gray PVC pipe, usually used for the rainwater drainage. But when we polished it with sandblasting, it suddenly looked very cool. Now we also use it as a bonsai pot. We also made furniture using ocean trash just as it is. Recently, we used them to make lighting for a restaurant, which is completed recently in Teshima. I've found that if I hold on to things that catch my attention for a while, their purpose eventually reveals itself. The place was originally 400 square meter factory. We kept half of it as a food factory and turned the other 200 square meter into a restaurant that served food made with the local organic vegetables. The factory is on the right and the restaurant is on the left. They look like twins. This is where the Teshima Art Museum by Ryue Nishizawa. The island used to be pretty quiet and was losing people. But now there's a movement to bring it back to life. Some people are starting to gather here, learning directly from the elderly local and trying to protect the islands farming and fishing traditions. Teshima has always had a lot of fresh water, so it's a great place to grow food. And since it's far from the main island, people didn't really use agrochemical or plastic. So in a way, the farming here has always been kind of naturally organic. One of our clients saw the potential and started a project to take over from older farmers and bring farming back. I used to be a metal work. It used to be a metal workshop. Anyway, the ceiling was high and the space felt really good. In the evening, it looks like this. The inside grows with light. Sometimes, no matter how good the design is, it gets lost in the noise of the city and doesn't stand out. Still, there are things that don't get lost, like warning tapes and other safety signs. They always stand out. I actually like these kinds of things, and they are part of my collection. I already bought two of them in New York on this trip. This is an example of using shock to stir people emotions. On the left is the Happa Hotel. Since it was shown in a model exhibition, we used styrofoams to make the shower tiles to clearly show that is just a model. On the right is a shop along the Omotesando to attract the people to go downstairs. We thought that beautiful design alone wouldn't work in that area, so we used a spray painted finish that makes people stop and feel a little shocked. Something everyone would normally avoid, but it works here. This is a blue tap. This is a blue tap, something very common at the construction site in Japan. But when used in a different country and in a more refined way, it can become something completely new. On the left is a space we created for an exhibition at Tea House. We increased the air pressure inside the room and filled it with a giant blue tap balloon, creating a unique experience. On the right is our installation at the Japan Pavilion for the 2021 Venice Biennale. At that time, we also built the exterior using scaffolding pipes and blue taps. Since we were using reclaimed wood as well, we needed to find a good way to connect it with the pipe. So we experimented with how to join the two materials. We developed a method of cutting the reclaimed wood into curved shaped by moving a circular saw side to side. The technique later became known as senban. That technique evolved further, and we made things like these. We carved into soft material like manga books, and even into hard material like bricks. In Japan, we call furniture that carpenters make for themselves on construction site makanai furniture. You can find similar things in many countries. But the material and the types of furniture depend on the culture, which I find really interesting. So I often take photos of them. I became clearly aware of this during the tea house project. The photo on the right shows the construction site. In the middle of the process, we changed the design and used the carpenter's idea to make the final furniture pieces. Subtract design is a word often used to describe Japanese design. In that context, it usually means reducing decorative elements. But for us, subtraction means leaving things as they are. and creating space for the users to shape and grow the design over time. One of the best example of this is Sayama Flat. Here we didn't add anything. We planned the space by taking things away. We left blank area for residents and allowed them to change and adjust the space themselves. It's like taking away a green wall. It makes everything look clean and organized. But it feels like something is missing. That feeling becomes the urge to do something yourself, a kind of DIY impulse. I made this drawing to understand what that really means and to reflect on what we actually did. これちょっと説明の補足をしてもらうと、日本の有名な我が輩は猫であるなんですけど、もともとその白い部分の文字を消していくと全く違う文章になるっていう説明なんですけど。
So an example of the subtractive architecture is represented, for instance, by this famous Japanese text in which just by retracting some of the words in the text, he's saying that he's creating new sentences.
As a result, 16 years later, the space looked like this. Through this project, we began to think about how architecture can stay close to people. Through the Sayama Flat project, we started to think about architecture that involves the people who live in it. We call this kind of building self-driving architecture. This is a proposal for an art school building that was not built. What we thought about here gave us idea for our later work. We plan to use the yellow area in the section drawing for many purposes. Like this. これは同じ場所でいろんな使い方ができるようにして、なんていうの、足らない面積を補うというか、必要な用途が、たくさんあって、それを兼ねることによってなんですか、面積を縮小させるっていう、そのためにやったものです。
So that animation was showing how even in the same area, by using these components, I suppose, you're able to transform it and have different purposes, I guess, take over that space.
ありがとうございます。This idea came from Paris. Even building that is hard to change by design can reveal why the streets of Paris are so lively. これはこの真ん中の下のその穴が開いてるじゃないですか。で、あれにこうポールを刺してこうマルシェができるんですけど、あれがあることによって朝本当に15分とか20分ぐらいで全部マルシェがバーッと立って、でお昼ご飯終わるとそのマルシェが畳まれて、またこの上を車が走り出したりするっていうその変化がこういうシステムによって作られている。
So he looked to this example in Paris, where just by having these little holes in the ground, every single morning, these marketplaces can be quickly erected by inserting poles into those holes. And in a matter of 15, 20 minutes, you're able to have these open air markets. But by lunchtime, they can quickly be dismantled and put away. And he is inspired by seeing the transformation of the city in this way. And where a market was, once stood in the morning, by the afternoon, cars are driving over, passing by, and the same street, I guess, takes on multiple forms.
右上のがリパブリックっていう公園の置かれてる家具なんですけど、普通の家具を置いてたら一晩でなくなってしまうと思うんですけど、これは多分手で運べる重さではないようなものなんですけど、あれがこうハンドリフターを介して動かせることによって、ある時はスケート場、ある時はライブラリー、ある時はコンサートの場所っていうふうにその公園が豊かに変化していくっていうのが、そこでは見られました。
In the upper right image, these benches are from Republic Park. And these benches aren't, they're heavy enough that, someone can't just easily lift them and move them away. But if you bring in, say, a small hand operated forklift, you can probably move them around. And by doing so, you can have that space transform into a skate park, have concerts there. And so there is still the ability to transform the space.
The result of these studies can be seen in the art school project at the Musashino Art University. The building is made with a prefab structure. On the first floor, there is a workshop with a multi-purpose space next to it. In that space, sometimes exhibitions, making things, and lecture are held. The second floor is a studio where first year to fourth year students come together to design. The use of the space changes every day. For the reason, there are holes at the regular intervals along the raceway where we insert metal pipe. These pipes are joined with panel to make a wall. At the same time, smart light let us control the power and light freely as the wall changes. The furniture can also be moved with a hand lifter. Also, the walls are painted by the students themselves. When the walls are painted, the original sign is hidden, so the student can put the new sign using a stamp. As a result, rich activity and new works are made every day. In Japan, houses are being torn down everywhere, and most of materials are simply thrown away. Every day, a large amount of wood is burned or discarded. Recently, I've been thinking, is there any way we can reuse more of it? Of course, some of it is recycled into fuel chips or plywood material. But when it comes to the use in architecture, it's almost nothing. There are still many limits. This project came from the demolition site in Tokyo. I picked up old pillars, beams, and even some furniture from there. When we were working on the first Aesop Street store in Japan, we felt that old materials match really well with Aesop product. We wanted to use old wood, but buying it through a dealer didn't feel right. So we thought, if houses are being torn down every day in Tokyo, why not just go and pick up what's being thrown away? That's what we did. I started to going to demolition site, grabbing what I could and bringing it back to the office. For the design, I decided to use old wood placed vertically, new plywood horizontally. It was a simple combination, but it created a strong contrast between old and new. That trash picking project later made its way into something a bit more high end. We showed it at the Biennale. Back when we did the ESOP store, we used old material just because they looked cool. But by the time of the Biennale, people started to see these materials as part of the conversation around sustainability. The project was based on regular houses, you know, just ordinary homes you'd find anywhere. But even these ordinary homes have their own story, and that story is reflected in their architecture. After the exhibition ended, the leftover waste material was slowly transported to Oslo. It seems that Kadowaki Laboratory is now planning to reuse them as part of a building. This is a project called 50 Norman, located in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. Waste wood, which is Kyoto would be rubbish, was processed and used to make furniture and crates. On site, FRP was used to make a large facade face plate. The sign was also made by sandblasting and scratching the existing wall. So it turned out like this, and the shop became pretty popular. Thanks to that, they are expanding into the next space over, and they are reopening even bigger the day after tomorrow. This time, the building was torn down by a crane, so the old wood we used was pretty rough. A lot of pieces were kind of random in length, so we used a technique called netsugi, which means splicing the wood at the base. In addition, this time we brought in washi artist Wataru and tried a finish using backing paper. James Freeman, the founder of the Blue Bottle Coffee, saw this project and said he wanted to create something like it in Los Angeles. The plan has already started, and the site has been chosen. The site is located just below Hollywood and above Melrose. It used to be a film studio, but due to digitalization, many of these studios are no longer needed. Now, beautiful old wooden studios are starting to reopen, and area-wide renovation is underway. The projects are already in progress at the 1161 and 1155 and across the street as well. At the 1151, a new building is being planned, and we are also helping a bit with that project. Our goal is to create a sense of unity across the entire area through design. The original concept came from the recent trend. Because of the weak yen, many Americans have been visiting Japan and experiencing its high quality, but when they return home, they missed it. So we wanted to create a place in the USA where people can not only relive that experience, but also see it evolve even further. The idea is to combine Japanese quality with the relaxing atmosphere of California. We call the concept Meri Hari and started thinking about how to express that balance through space design. So we started thinking of the foundation, infrastructure, and the basic structure, the part that connect to the California environment as the Meri part. These are made in an open and generous way. Then we add Japanese quality as the hari, something more detailed and refined, and combine the two. This idea was inspired by the bouquinists in Paris. As you can see on the right, we plan to make the final element in Japan, bring them to the site, and assemble them on top of the base. We believe this approach will create a space that is open and airy, yet detailed and delicate at the human scale.
ちょっと説明をしたいんですけど、何をしているかっていうと、日本の職人を連れて最終のフィニッシュをさっきの50ノーマンとかもやったように、でも全部日本の職人連れて作ることはできないので、50ノーマンだったら10日間限りでできる仕事を作って持ってって、ローカルの工事と組み合わせてやるっていうのをやってたんですけど、今度このLA でも、もうちょっとそのスケールを大きくそれをやる必要があるので、そのなんていうか構造をもう少しデザインと絡ませてきっちり作ろうと思っていて、そのために基礎とウォータープルーフとなんかインフラとかは事前に作っておいてもらって、手の触れるところ絡むところを日本から作って持ってったものをそこでインストールして作るっていうことをやっていて、黄色いパートがその日本から持っていく部分で、黒いパートが LA のパートみたいな、そういう構造を一つ決めて考えて、すいません長くて
So in the way at 50 Norman, they brought in some Japanese craftsmen to take care of the final finishes. They want to replicate something like that for this new project in LA as well. But 50 Norman, it took them about 10 days by using the Japanese craftsmen's labor. But given that this LA project is of a larger scale, there's a need for the structure and the construction, I guess, to be a little bit more entangled with the design itself. And so what they're planning is for things like the foundation, waterproofing, to be done in LA, and then for the Japanese craftsmen to come in and just do the final finishes. So the things that you would actually experience, the things that you would touch, for instance. And so in this diagram on the right side of the screen, what's drawn in gray, for instance, would be constructed on site already done by the workers in LA, whereas the yellow components would be completed by the Japanese craftsmen. Or yes, and the yellow is built in Japan and then brought to LA.
At the same time, creating a comfortable human scale space is just as important. I experienced that kind of atmosphere in Brentwood in LA, and I hope to bring that same feeling to this project as well. All of these elements, from half architecture to furniture, are combined and arranged through the entire space. まあ、from furniture to counter and pergola and half architecture I call. This is to create a consistent atmosphere from existing building to new construction. Right to building is existing. We have to make a new building with a local architect, but we can't design everything, new part. So, but we have to make same feeling, same atmosphere. So that's why we have to make a connection. So that's why we made such a concept. This is how it actually looks. It's the interior of a dashi shop called Okume. This is a design for James' new cafe. Now we are designing his house as well in Ohio. Then that stone from this that ground, the ground have a lot of river stone. So we want to make a connection with the house and his own cafe. So that's why we want to use stone for the counter. This is a newly built part where we are creating half architecture space designed for people to interact. Pergolas that encourage people to stay and spend time are also important in LA. This Las Palmas project we've been talking about is a perfect example of what we should aim for, a place where people can move freely between indoor and outdoor without stress, thanks to California's beautiful climate. We already explored this idea in Tokyo through a recent project, Blue Bottle Coffee Toyosu. The park was already a place where people naturally gathered, so I asked myself, how can we make it better without disrupting it? I decided to think of the entire park as a cafe. Instead of separating the two, I blended the park with the interior space. We added semi-outdoor seating and used FRP walls that let it in soft light during the day and glow warmly at night. Now the cafe feels like a natural part of the park, and every time I visit, it's full of people. FRP became popular in our work because it combines four great features: waterproofing, semi-transparency, height strength, and the ability to create large forms depending on the mold. It's an amazing material with no real substitute. We focused on these qualities and used FRP in the sauna of a capsule hotel called Doshi. There it was applied to the floor, wall, and the ceiling as a material that is both waterproof and semi-transparent, allowing light to pass through. Later, we used FRP again for the sink and the wall at Aesop Rukwa. We also used FRP in a pavilion home pub called El Amigo. It's a material that somehow gives off a slightly Japanese feel. There's even a story that Isamu Noguchi once used it in place of shoji screen in his New York studio. Going back a bit, thanks to the work we did for Doshi, we were later approached to the renovator Sento, Japanese public bath. Sento are often said to be in decline, but I've always loved taking baths, and when I discovered how enjoyable sauna can be, I started thinking maybe there's a new future for Sento. Let me explain a bit about the history of Sento. In the Edo period, people didn't have private baths at home, and since all buildings were made of wood, there was a high risk of large fires, so the Edo shogun created the public bathhouse as a safer solution, and that's how Sento began. After World War II, the government built many of them, especially in cities like Tokyo, to improve public hygiene. But as more people started having baths at home, Sento began disappearing. At the same time, Super Sento and hot springs stayed popular. That made us think, how can we make Sento more attractive for young people today? 何を言いたいかっていうと、結局風呂を好きな人の人数は変わってなくて、ただ行ってる風呂の種類が変わっているっていうことなので、それを見てその銭湯のあり方を変えればまた人は来るんじゃないかって考えた。
Ultimately, the number of people going to public baths and hot springs haven't changed at all. It's just that the type of bath that they're going to is changing. And so they're positing that if they change perhaps how one interacts with the public bath or how one spends time at the public bath, perhaps they can encourage people to go to the public baths again.
We designed a Sento by switching from wood fire heating to gas and using the extra space for a sauna, relocating the laundry area and adding a beer bar, creating a new routine, bath, sauna, beer, home, happiness. So here's what we got. This is inside the bath. By chance, the sauna boom arrived at the same time, and now the Sento has become so popular that you need a reservation to get in. We are now thinking about bringing a Sento into the Las Palmas project I mentioned earlier. Saunas are also getting incredibly popular in New York these days. I have already experienced several of these. It's very good. Revisiting things that were once popular in Japan but are now being lost has become important to me, especially in the field of architecture. The reason is simple. The things that Japanese people valued in the past often remain meaningful even as time passes. For example, the open and honest communication is an incentive. Shrines, which have their roots in nature worship and are deeply connected to the Shinto rituals and local festival and the temples, and the temples, which serve as places that hold family memories and connections. Many of these places were also built in excellent location. I believe the reason they are no longer used or appreciated as much today is just a kind of mismatched. If we take a fresh look at them, I believe they can once again meet new needs in today's society. This shrine is a good example of this. There are about 80,000 shrines in Japan. That's more than the 55,000 convenience stores. But in recent years, many shrines have been shutting down. And in 20 years, the number could drop even more. Like Sento, shrines are built in a good location. So the question is, how can we preserve them? Just as I was thinking about this, a shrine reached out to us for advice. They wanted to use their small ring for new activities. Right now, we are working on a design for that. We are now working on design for it. We are trying to make a giant wind chime with nearby residents using bamboo from the site. This shrine has a strong budget, but many other don't. Many other don't. They building, they, their buildings are beautiful, but they need new idea. This is something we should all think about. Next, let's talk about the temple. Temple is Japan have a long had a tradition of shukubo, lodging facility where visitor can stay and experience shojin ryori, Buddhist vegetarian meal as a part of the spring training, spiritual training. If we look at it from a different perspective, this traditional system has a potential to become a modern retreat center, which is very popular today. Recently, a temple was created on a vast site of about 2.5 million square feet, bringing together shrines and temple from all over the Japan. Scattered across the grounds are main hall, a zazen meditation hall, a tea room, a museum, gardens, bath house, and a dining hall We are now planning to add a farm and a shukubo, creating a kind of Japanese-style retreat center. Visitors will be able to stay on site, follow a training routine, eat shojin ryori, and purify their body and mind by slowing walking through the temple ground. もう終わります。In this way, we continue to respond to each need, working through the method of half architecture and aiming to create space that breathes. This is what we believe our work is all about. Thank you.
So, if there are any questions, we'll take them. Would you like to sit over there?
あ、OK。これはつなげるのかな。Yeah, ifなんか
It might be more of a statement, but thank you very much for your talk. Toward the end, when you got to the baths, the sento, the shrines, the temples, it seemed that you were making an argument about traditional or older styles of Japanese architecture and life, and thinking about how to reinvigorate them. And it's interesting because you started with materials, so old wood, and then kind of moving to old buildings. I thought, like, if you could just talk about that more, because you had to rush a little at the end, and it was actually getting very, very interesting as you were talking about architecture. So if you could talk about that a little more.
あれですか。古いものとそのなん。
その最後の方に銭湯とか、神社とかお寺とかの話で、日本の古い、伝統的な建築とかライフスタイルの話をしていて、それをまた活性化させるっていう建築につなげるっていう話をされていたんですけど、そこについて、もう少し詳しくお話しいただけると、マテリアルの最初マテリアルで古材とか廃材とかの話を絡んでいたんですけども、そこについてちょっと最後時間が
これ今ちょうどそのその2つの関係をっていうことですか。どういうことですか。その僕できる限りその小さいものから大きなものがなんかこう横断しながら絡んでいるっていうことをイメージしてもらえるように、すごく小さいマテリアルの興味とスケールの大きいそのサイトとか時間とかそういったものを絡ませていて、なんていうかそんな明確なこう理由はないんですけど、なんか一つながりにあって、なんか日本にあるすごく大事なテクスチャーだと思っていて、その寺の存在とか
神社の存在とか銭湯っていう、それからまあそういう古い材料とかっていうのが非常に貴重な存在だと思っていて、それらをやっぱりどうにかしてうまいこと使いたいっていうのはあるのと、あとその建築を建築なだけ作ってるっても何もこう状況が変わらないので、やはりその人のどうやって人を動かしていくかっていうことも建築家が考えて計画に取り込んでいくっていうことが必要なんじゃないかと思ってやっているんですね。それが多分比較的僕のかなり個性的な部分かなと思ってはいるんですけど、そこをなんとなくこう伝えたいつもりで今いろんなものをミックスして話をしてたつもりなんですけど。
What Joe would like to get across and what he hopes that you will all take away is the fact that he sees the relationship between the smaller scale, so from like the materials to the larger scale, so whether it be the larger sites or the programs that he's dealing with, they're all connected, I guess, in his mind. And so these Japanese shrines, the temples, the sento, just the materiality, in his mind, they're all important and characteristic of Japan. And so in his work, instead of just creating architecture, he's really thinking about how to get people to interact and engage with it. And so he's hoping that these are all vehicles, I guess, to convey these very distinctly Japanese features. And he doesn't want the first half of his presentation of like the more material experiments to feel distinct from, for instance, the latter half.
Thank you, Joe, for the presentation. Such a pleasure to see the work. Maybe my question is to learn a little bit more about your practice and the way in which you work in Tokyo. And I'm curious also of the process of starting to do work or developing work in the US and how that process is different from the work in Japan. Like in particular through the design of the projects or even the execution, like the construction of the projects, and how you deal with that in your practice.
東京で設計事務所を構えるということについて質問してあります。で
僕のデザインってなんて言うんでしょう、何かこう形を持っていて、それをこう決め技として出すタイプではなくて、まあたくさん日本にいる巨匠の人たちが、まあ、安藤さんだったらコンクリート、熊さんだったらこう木の塊とか、そういうなんか一つのスタイルをこう振りかざすっていうタイプではなくて、どちらかというとそのコンテクストっていうか、そのプロジェクトに内在する条件っていうものを材料にして一つ一つそこから組み上げていくっていうのが僕の設計の仕方で、そうする時にこのアメリカでのプロジェクトっていうのは一度実はそのブルーボトルの LA のお店をやったことがあるんですけど、あれは僕は屈辱的にこう失敗したプロジェクトと思っていて、っていうのはやはり全然日本の職人と同じ仕事が図面描いてもできないっていうことがまあ分かって、その時に誰でも分かるものを作れるようにするか、それとも いつもと同じ型を持ち込んでやるかっていうのを悩んだことがあって、それで結局今同時2つともやってるんですけど、どこでもできそうなラフなデザインをどう作るかっていうのは今バリ島でやってて、でアメリカで今やってるのは、日本のそのさっき言った黄色いパートだったりするような日本の作り手をどうプロジェクトに絡ませるかっていう、でその絡まし方っていうのが一つの特徴になるかなって思っていて、それを今盛んにそこをきっかけにデザインを生み出しているっていうところです。
So my designs are not something that are very formally driven. So for instance, in other Japanese architects, you might associate Tadao Ando with concrete or Kengo Kuma with the wood filigree tectonics. Rather, my work is more about connecting with the context. So whether it be taking kind of material from a site and finding ways to use that in a project. And so in the case of an American project that I did. So in the past, I've actually worked on a Blue Bottle store in LA, which I actually considered to be a bit of a failure on my part. And through that project, I learned that I can't communicate the same, I guess, degree of detail using the drawings that I would draw for Japanese contractors, and that doesn't quite get across to some of the American contractors. And so now what I'm trying to work through is producing designs that can be constructed anywhere. So whether it be in the diagram that I showed earlier with the yellow and the gray, in which I'm trying to integrate Japanese craft into the project in a strategic way. I guess those are the things that I'm grappling with right now, of how to bring Japanese craft that feels true to Japan, but into the American context.
でそういう意味で言うと、どこも変わらないっていうか、その中での特徴を見つけてってデザインに起こしていくので、国内においても国内における、例えば寺だったり神社だったりのコンテクストは多分他ではなかなか得にくいデザインのきっかけだったりするので、それを材料にしてるし、アメリカではその作り方がそのデザインのきっかけになるしっていうふうに言うと、どこでも基本は変わらないって思ってますけど。
And so to add on to that, basically this approach makes it so that the way we are approaching design kind of applies anywhere. So in the case of these American projects, the focus becomes more on just the Japanese craft and how to integrate that to the whatever context we're then trying to bring it to. Whereas our projects in Japan, these temples and shrines, we're then again working with that, trying to work with that context, so the Japanese craft within the Japanese context. And so it makes it so that our approach kind of applies across the board.
Thank you so much.
Hi, that was really inspiring. Thank you, Joe. I'm curious because looking at the projects, I think your translation between different scales were quite successful and it's very convincing. But I'm just curious, that's not, maybe it's not shown here, but was there any friction that you had to you encountered, or like any obstacles when you shift from object scale to building scale?
まずそのスケールに馴染んでいったのは本当に卒業したなりに事務所を持ってしまったがゆえにできることからやっていこうってことで、できることが家具から始まったので、だんだんそれがインテリアになって住宅とか、それからもうちょっと大きなものにって変わっていった、そのプロセスが僕にその技能を与えていったわけですけど、今度それを普通だったらそれを一つずつ切り捨ててって、大きなものにどんどんシフトするのが本来のあり方だと思うんですけど、僕はなんかそれがすごく嫌で、建築家の大きな建物を作った時の家具の収まりの悪さがすごい嫌いなんですけど、だからやっぱりそっちもきれいにもう知っちゃったからちゃんときれいにやりたいって思うと、じゃあどうやったらそれを維持できるのかっていうことを考えるんですけど、それは多分簡単に言うとお金の問題なので、どうやって小さいもので妥当なお金を取るかっていうことを考えて、僕たちの見積もりの出し方っていうのがスケールから引っ張らないようにしていて、人の動きに対してお金を出していくっていうことを主にしているので、それを小さくても高いけど買いたいっていう人がいればそれを買ってもらうっていう仕組みをいまだに続けているので、だから一応その小さいものから大きなものまで、差別なくできているっていう、それはあります。
So I guess upon graduating, I ended up starting my own firm, and so starting with the smaller scale and moving from furniture to interiors to, then eventually full buildings was just kind of a result of just working with what I could initially. One thing that I try to avoid and dislike is when you have full-scale buildings in which the furniture doesn't quite fit in a satisfying way, especially given my experience with working at the furniture scale. And so we try to we treat all of our projects regardless of scale, so whether it's small or large, with the same level of attention and detail. And this also then begins to relate to budgets and how we set our fees. And so our fees are less related to scale, actually. And so even if there's a smaller project, and maybe it's small but expensive, but if somebody will take it, if we are able to convince a client, we try to work with people like that because we try not to discriminate, I guess, based on scale. And
similar. So he's focusing on working in a similar attitude in the design process for both the smaller scale, the objects, and the larger projects.
なんかそしてうちに来る人たちで、大きなプロジェクトだけをやりたい人って少なくて、小さいプロジェクトもやりたいというか、今やっぱりこの時代で巨大なものを作りたいっていう発想を持つのってなかなか難しいというか、環境の問題含めて、そうした時にやはりそういった良心を考えた時に、やはり小さいものだけど大事にできるものを作って、それで生活していけたらいいなって思ってる人たちがたくさんいるような気がするんですよ。でそういう子たちがうちに、来ているような気がするんですね。でその中でも比較的やっぱり全部を網羅するっていうのは僕は27年間やってきて得た技術なので、それを一気に数年で覚えることはできないから、うちには家具チームと建築チームっていう一つスケールの違うチームが、存在してます。
to add on to that, many of the clients who come to us tend to be people who want projects at varying scales as well. And so there are very few clients who only want to pursue large
キャンプじゃな
projects.
くてスタッフ
Stuff. But then also in the staff at his firm as well. So over the past 27 years, it's difficult for any one designer who works for us to be able to work at both scales and switch between scales super easily. And so we do have a furniture team as well as an architecture team within our office that works on those projects.
一つちょっと付け加えたいのはどちらかというと今結構他の国に行っても日本でもそうなんですけど、今ここにいる人たちはどうかわかんないですけど、その巨大なものを作りたいっていう人がどれだけいるのかっていう、だけど巨大なものを作っていかないと食べていけないって思わされてる人たちが多いような気がしていて、そうじゃなくてどうできるのか、建築をやり続けられるのかっていうのが結構若い人たちの問題意識としてあるのかなって思ってるんですけど、僕らはそれに真っ向から向き合ってやっているっていう感じですかね。
I'm also questioning how many people only want to pursue large projects. And so maybe there have been associations with, working on larger projects to get paid and I guess put food on the table, for instance. But in this day and age with sustainability considerations as well, there seems to be more people who want to work on perhaps smaller projects, but that are kind of approached with finer detail and kind of treated in a more precious way.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation and for your generosity in sharing your work in progress. That was really great to see. I was curious if you could speak more to your process of material experimentation. Is that, especially as projects get larger, is that all still done in-house, or do you collaborate with local craftsmen or artists as well in their workspaces? I guess a secondary question to that is, you showed us your shelves of the objects that you collected over the years and but could you describe to us more what your workspace or your studio space is like?
特に進行中のプロジェクトを見せてもらって、そのプロセスについて、の質問なんですけど、特にマテリアルの実験的なそういうことを、大きいプロジェクトでやるとき、最初の質問が大きいプロジェクトでやるときに、その事務所内のチームで、こういう実験とかっていうのをやるのか、それとも、現地の職人さんとかっていう方たちとコラボレーションで取り組むのか。で、2つ目の質問が、ゴミ、拾い物の、棚の写真が、あったと思うんですけど、そういうものが、事務所内にあるっていうことについて、あとスタジオのスペースが、実際どんな感じで、こういう拾ったものがたくさんある事務所なのか、
はい。
事務所内の空間についての質問です。
素材感っていうのは非常になんか僕にとっては大事なもので、それがいいとか悪いとかってあんまり頭の中で組み上げるものではないので、やはりいいなって思った時にそれを物色する、集めて、
それをとりあえず何でいいのかわからないけど置いておくっていうことはすごく大事なことで、そのうちさっきの問いの研磨に至るところとかもそうなんですけど、こういうのがいいなって思っているものがいずれなんか自分のプロジェクトに必要なマテリアルになってくるので、まずなんか直感としていいなって思うものをこう集めといて、でなんかプロジェクトに向き合った時にこれを作るにはどうしたらいいかって今度次考えるんですけど、その時に、まあ、我々が恵まれているのは、タンクっていうまあ、今回もアメリカに一緒に来て、ものを作って帰っていってるチームがあるんですけど、そのチームがよくうちのサンプルを作ってくれるんですね。でそういう考えたこととか、まあ、気に入ってるものをなんとなくこう身の回りに並べといて、それをある時にタイミングが来たりプロジェクトと相性があった時に何かそれを形にしようって思って、でその時に形にしようって思ってもデスクトップの上で考えても何もそれはつながらないので、やはり手を動かして実際にものを作りながら考えなきゃいけないっての時に、自分たちでやるのはさすがに大変なので、以前は自分たちでやってたんですけど、さすがにもう今はできなくなっているので、それを外にアウトソーシングして一緒にやってくれるチームがいるので、それによってそういうものが実現しているっていうのはあります。
So materiality, as evident in the presentation, is very important to us. And we don't really distinguish between a good or bad necessarily. It's just that whenever I'm drawn to something, I'll collect it and keep it in our space. And we find that even if we don't know why we're drawn to it, we don't know why we like it, just by having it in our office space, we find that the material might eventually, the purpose for it, I guess, will reveal itself. So when we're faced with a new project, something that we collected some time ago then might find its way into how we're working on a new project, I guess. And we also collaborate quite a bit with the team at Tank, who makes a lot of our samples. And we find one important part of our process is, instead of just facing a desktop computer all day, we actually think it's important to work with our hands with these found materials. But now we're reaching a point where we can't prototype everything ourselves, and so these collaborators will actually help us turn these found materials and objects into the things that become our projects.
そういう仲間がやっぱり増えてきてはいます。職人、本当に蚊帳の職人だとか、今回も使った和紙の職人とか、土壁の職人とか、漆の職人とか、まあ、そういういろんな職人が我々と仕事をする機会をだいぶ作れるようになってきていて、まあそういう関係がどんどん増えていってるって感じですかね。
And we're also very fortunate that our list of collaborators just continues to grow. So craftsmen, whether it be washi craftsmen, thatched roofs, mud, lacquer craftsmen, all these projects, especially in the first half of the presentation, were products of collaborative processes.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, Joe. Thank you so much for coming. The work is really remarkable, and I think it's interesting that you showed your half architecture when I'm a little bit familiar with some of your more full stuff. So it was interesting to see and start to understand how they relate to each other. The question that I have is related to drawing and the importance of being there. In most of your projects that you were showing at the beginning, it was very clear that you individually were there and you were figuring things out, and it didn't appear that you were drawing them in a traditional architectural sense, more that you were learning from a space And I just wonder about how you translate that into a practice which is working from Japan to the United States and elsewhere, and how you work like that with your staff. Are you drawing things? What is the importance of physically being in a space to your work? And in some ways, you doing the work yourself with your hands.
おそらくその狭山フラットとかは現場にいて、ずっとそこで見ながら作ったって思っているように思うんですけど、あれもやっぱり僕は意外と客観的な距離で、息はするんですけど、そんなにべったりはいない。で、僕の役割っていうのはさっきの黄色いものとコンクリートのその黒のものの関係をなんか方程式っていうかなんか作り出すっていう、そういうこうまとめをする役割で、やはり現場に近くいる人って意外とその客観的に見れない部分があるので、その整理ができないことが多いんですよね。だから狭山フラットも最初は別に剥がすだけで作ろうとしたわけではなくて、今やろうとしているスタッフの人たちのもがいている状況から見た時に、だったらもうつけなくていいんじゃないっていう、そんなお金ないんだったら足さなくていいんじゃない、じゃあ引くだけで構成するってもしかしたらできるんじゃないっていう投げかけをこうするんですけど、それはもしかしたらすごく現場に近いとできないことで、っていうのは一つ僕の立場としては客観的に距離を置きながら、その何がそこで必要なのかって見出すポジションであるっていう、ディレクションを決めるっていうのは僕の大事な役割です。で、一方でやっぱりそこを分かち合うのはやっぱり現場ではあるので、ある程度構想が整理されたところでやはり現場で具体的にここはこうであそこはこうでっていうのを見ていって、そこでそのダイアグラムと現実のつなぎ目を確認していくっていうのもやはり実際大事で言ってますね。だから現場にはやっぱり行きますね。
So it's of course very important to go to the site. So in the instance of the Sayama Flat project, for instance, I wasn't on site all the time, but it was being on site was an important component of figuring out how we were going to proceed with the project. So it wasn't necessarily very evident to us in the beginning that it was going to be an entirely subtractive process, but it was through working on site and seeing the actual conditions that we came to realize that, we perhaps didn't need to add too much to it. It was more, the design came more from like the subtractive process. But I do see my role as kind of creating some sort of organization. And so just to evoke that yellow and gray diagram again, creating the organization for what's built on site versus what we're bringing in is how I approach my projects these days. But then, of course, I then will have to go to the site to direct how things need to be on site to connect the diagram to the actual conditions. And so actual site work is critical.
And maybe to add, to clarify, for the first project, the Sayama flat, it might appear as Joe was on site all the time, but it's actually not the case. I think the distance between his role and the site is something that he considers important in terms of viewing more holistic perspective on the project. And so, yes, going to the site is important for direction giving, but that distance he tries to keep.
そう図面はさすがに、まあ、僕は書かないですけど、その図面の書き方を教えますよね、今だに。だから図面が何を記すべきなのかっていうことは、まあ、結構大事なので、そこの、まあ、そこでもやっぱりディレクションですかね。自分で書くことはしないです。
To answer the part of your question about drawings, I don't draw our own drawings very much anymore, but rather I teach my staff how to draw the drawings to convey what's most important. And so again, I find myself in more of that directing role.
Thank you so much. 一つだけ、多分その日本にはまだまだたくさん手作りのすごく魅力的